I'm playing the full game of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and today, in this final preview, I'll tell you what those very early hours are like. Playing dice, fighting bandits, drinking at the tavern, and getting thrown in the pillory and more. Let's go! So we have full access to the game currently, but this preview, we're really only allowed to talk about that opening section and tutorial, pretty much right up until the point where the game lets you loose. And that takes about 8 to 10 hours according to PLAYON and Warhorse. I did spend about that 10 hour, maybe slightly more in just this section because I like to take in the world, smell the flowers, do all that good stuff that I like to do in RPGs. But now that we are so close to launch as well, I'm going to keep a lot of my in-depth discussions and criticism and everything for that full review, and also it's very hard to talk about a lot of that stuff when in this section of the game you're in a very linear part of the game where it's teaching you about the game's systems and mechanics and everything, and that's kind of hard to critique in depth when pretty much from, I'm assuming, from this point afterwards the game's going to let you loose into that massive open world just like KCD1 had, so there's going to be difficult to really see what that full game experience is like. However, obviously I will have a full review at launch, which you should be subscribed for, and also like this video. Jesus Christ be praised.
It seems this isn't my day. I knew I shouldn't have bet with you. You've improved since that last time in Ratai.
I won back then too, as I recall. You had to give me your bow.
You were unbelievably lucky, beating me after just one day of training.
Being a blacksmith might bring no glory, but it has its benefits. Like keeping your head on your shoulders. Ah. Now, come now. I was the one who raised you, but you know how things really are.
And I can't wait to sleep in a proper bed.
And some wine!
Oh, fucking hell.
Oh, it's closed.
Praised. So the early hours of the game, what are they really like? Well, pretty good. I think the intro sort of tutorial section of this game is a lot stronger than in KCD1, as it gives you a lot more time to breathe in between these story moments that are actually kicking off the story and starting that journey while allowing you to try a lot of the game's systems. Just in this opening section, I've done some alchemy, runs exactly the same as I did in KCD1. I've played some dice, I've done some combat, I beat Hans again in a duel, go Henry, and just generally got to breathe a little bit in these early stages of the game, as well as presenting you the events that happened in KCD1 in quite a well done way. So you're not necessarily just going to read like a list of, you know, an 80-hour RPG's dialogue sequence of all the twists and turns and everything that happened in the first game, but Henry and Hans and the other characters around the campfire and just during those initial hours will talk to you about what happened with you and Hans in the past. Like, what did you guys get up to? And the reveal about Henry being a noble bastard and how that affects him now and how he's feeling about that, and you get to make those decisions and talk about that with the people around you. I also like that it does seem that in this opening sequence you will make some comments about how you personally feel or things that happened during the first game, say like decision-based things. I don't know if that's going to really play into the grand scheme of things. Really, I'll have to wait and see, but it's interesting that there is options are there to choose, say for example, how your relationship with Teresa was in the first game. Very interested to see if that will play out differently depending on that decision. But ultimately, like, what I really liked about these opening hours is just playing a new Kingdom Come experience with Henry and Hans. There's this beautiful opening sequence where you see Mutt running and then you're introduced to Henry and Hans, and that old KCD theme is playing, and I was honestly just smiling. Like it was a little bit of goosebumps. You know, it's just exciting to be with these characters again and seeing what the continuation of their journey is going to be, because it was quite disappointing the way it ended in KCD1, and I'm glad that we can finally continue this story and see where it goes. Now, performance and technology wise, I did play about half of this section with keyboard and mouse, and then I switched to controller just to try both of them. They both feel great. I've actually preferred the controller, which I wasn't expecting, as I played KCD1 almost exclusively with keyboard and mouse. And performance wise, I was sitting at 60 the whole time with everything on ultra and didn't have any issues. But again, this is just the intro section of the game. There is plenty more to come after this, so it's hard to really critique or get in depth with any of these systems or technology based things when you're really in the honeymoon section of the game. But let's talk about some combat and progression.
You fight like an old hag!
Curva! I'm wounded! Ha!
So in this opening section, you get to do some fisticuffs at the tavern, as well as some armed combat against Hans with a weapon, and then there's also some crossbow siege stuff as well. Now, I'm being intentionally vague about story stuff here because I don't want to spoil too much. I will cover some story stuff in a little bit. Now, from a combat perspective, we have seen, and in my original preview, I talked a little bit about this and how it feels as well, but the combat system has definitely been simplified, as well as the UI has been changed, and you do lose all of your, or most of your levels and progression at the start of the game due to an event, and you'll need to progress yourself back up to that big strong Henry that you remember from the end of KCD1. But starting on a combat system level, right, in KCD1 you had like the 6-star system where you were attacking from all 6 different angles, and for the most part here it is really just the top 3, at least to this point, that I've experienced. Right now, in interviews talking to Toby and in the footage that we have seen in the past, there is a little bit of difference depending on the weapon you're using with which of these star systems that you have available to you. However, just holistically across the board, I do like the simplification of just focusing on those top 3. I mean, from the most part in KCD1, I was only using those top 3, but it also makes it easier to block and parry, and I feel like my experience with KCD1, especially with this combat system, is rewarded here because I just kind of understand how this works, and it is quite a unique and difficult combat system that some people that may not have experienced this before, I'm sure, are definitely going to struggle with it, but the game does a better job of slowly introducing you to those mechanics, and I'm curious to see how that develops as, you know, you actually get access to some combos and master strikes and all that good stuff. This opening section doesn't allow you to try any of like the new weapon categories or anything other than a crossbow, which does feel great to use. It does have a much more of a direct shot compared to an arrow that has a bit earlier of a fall off. It took me a little bit to get used to in that siege section, but I did quite like using the crossbow. I probably will lean into that, I think maybe more than the bow, just to try out something new as we continue with the game. And progression wise, it's hard to really say anything because it's really just like the first level up that you kind of get in this section, right? Due to an event that happens, Henry loses basically all of your levels and skills and abilities from the first game, and you have to learn those again. However, I did have a good flick through all of the different skills and stats and everything, and just had a bit of a read to see things that are different here. And I'm probably going to do a video that's going to break down this a little bit more in depth, as well as just some of these wordings on how things are different, as I've got a couple of videos that I've sort of held off from putting out from the original preview that I had because we didn't have footage of things, which kind of makes it hard to create a visual video that you're watching on YouTube. So now that we do have footage we can use from this initial preview section, I'll be able to talk a little bit more in depth about some of that stuff. But there are new skills here. I'm particularly interested in a lot of the Houndmaster ones, just as I was reading the descriptions. So I'm curious to see how these develop. There's a lot of things that I really want to play around with, but that has to wait until I've told you about the story.
Christ! When did you learn to swim?
Just now!
What the hell is going on here? Grab them vagabonds!
You behave like a spoilt brat.
How dare you speak?
You know, if you just shut up and done some work, we'd have coin by now and be on our way to the castle, but no, not his lordship.
You've got a nerve. If you hadn't have played the hero, we'd have been there long since, and I wouldn't have had to get you out of that mess.
Oh yeah, because this isn't a mess, is it?
Fuck off!
After a brief intro section, you're essentially picking up immediately from where Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 ends. So Hans and Henry are essentially off on that journey to Trotsky Castle with the letter in hand, and this is where everything really kicks off. Obviously, as with every great game, things immediately go wrong, especially when Hans gets distracted by it. And then as everything hits the fan, you and Hans make a very perilous escape, and in the process, both Henry and Hans get injured, and that's how Henry loses that experience from KCD1. What I really like about this intro sequence here is Henry is definitely struggling with the trauma of his past, specifically those events from KCD1, and the game does a good job of reminding you of what happened in that game and presenting you in a way that's relevant to Henry without it being too meta-breaking of, you know, just reading the lines as I mentioned earlier. My favorite thing about this intro sequence after this point really as well is that Hans and Henry's dynamic is just fantastic, right? Like the brotherhood is really strong, and it does feel like a real like brother relationship, right? It's infuriating at times, but the love is absolutely there, and despite the fact that they get on each other's nerves, they understand they need each other and that they really bounce off each other well, and I can't wait to experience more of their dynamic throughout the game. Something I did notice, however, is I was a little disappointed to hear so many of the voice actors that played prominent characters in KCD1 returning to play different characters here. That does take me a little bit out of the experience. I assume there are brand new voice actors that we're going to experience, and I did definitely hear new ones during this opening section. It's just a little jarring when we're in the very early stages of this game and you're hearing things like the Peller's voice again or Captain Bernard's voice again, and they are doing slightly different voices, but you can tell it is them, and obviously it's very common in the industry to reuse voice actors, and it's done across the board, right? But for a sequel to a game and being introduced to new characters that are using the same voices from characters from the first game this early, I did find that a little bit jarring. When I talked to someone, I was like, oh, I know that voice. And you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that pulled me out of that initial early experience just a tiny little bit. But ultimately, at this point, I'm just excited to play more, right? That's enough preview talk. I just want to get back to playing. So I'll have more content rolling out as we get closer to launch. I'll see you then, and I'll absolutely see you for a ton of content after launch. But thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.